we can make whiskey anywhere in the world. Let's make it where we want to be. Let's be somewhere that, inspires us every day and keeps us motivated. That's really what led us to the town of Buena Vista. An American single malt whiskey is an interesting thing. It's just not known throughout our country. What is an American single malt? Well, we're trying to define that. It was the notion of learning something and sucking at something initially. And I always liked sucking at something because there's nowhere to go but up. And ultimately, that's really what led us to Deerhammer, was just this expression of creating something that we were so passionate about. In '99, I was in my early 20s, and I just couldn't get enough of just exploring the state and enjoying new experiences and learning new things. It was always the draw. I always felt every weekend this is the place I wanted to be. But I was still very much wrapped up in that 9-to-5 desk job as a graphic designer. And at that time, employment as a graphic designer in Denver just wasn't an option. I got some responses to resumes out in Boston and figured I'd give it a shot, back at the desk, make more advertisements.
Lenny and I met when I was going to nursing school in Boston. Lenny was working outside Boston. We bumped into each other at a pool session.
We ended up chatting a bit and decided to go boating. Started hanging out, just started having fun on the weekends, going kayaking. We were having a great time together. So as Amy finished up nursing school, things just kind of lined up, and I was able to drag her back to Colorado with me. We moved to Golden. Amy started a career as a nurse. I continued down the path as a graphic designer, ultimately taking on what I knew was going to be my last job as a graphic designer. It was the last interview I had in me. And there was definitely a yearning to look for other creative directions. I started out as a pretty serious beer geek, and I think beer is some amazing stuff. It's fun to make, it's especially fun to drink. There's some great complexities to it. I took to homebrewing, and over the course of about 10 years, it became a bit of an obsession. That was my creative outlet, to the extent that I was waking up at 4 a.m. to brew a batch of beer to achieve a greater result than the previous batch, or leaving work early to do the same. I started to learn about whiskey production and where it came from, particularly single malt. Its origins are so similar to beer. You're really making a beer first. Whiskey is the essence. It's all the best stuff of the beer. While I still had my day job sitting behind the desk, whiskey became the reward at the end of the day. And it was another experience and another path that I felt like I wanted to take on and understand.
This is kind of Lenny evolved, with distilling it was the next step. I think from there, just seeing how meticulous he is, how much attention to detail, and his interest in making things, those two things together, it was kind of scientist meets artist. He is always looking, what can I do better? How can this be better? We wanted to have a tasting room. In Colorado, you're allowed to have a tasting room. We wanted to be in a Main Street location for foot traffic, and that would be a great way to tell our story. And of course it was in Buena Vista, which was really the only place we wanted to be. We sold our house in Golden. I started working as a nurse in Salida, which was great. We rented this tiny house. We could use the same Wi-Fi signal. It was that close. He would just go back and forth all the time, doing it all himself, and getting everything for us to sell was, 70 hours a week. He was sleeping here most nights just because we had this one still that was wonderful, but he was running it all the time. We opened our doors in December of 11, and Lenny and I were the only ones here. We were the only 2 employees. The town just embraced us. They came in, they supported us, they were so happy to see what we were doing. Without having a busy tasting room, we wouldn't have been able to lay down whiskey and buy new equipment.
In deciding that we were going to build Deerhammer as a craft distillery, something that we always hold important is to just really survey what's going on in the whiskey landscape, what's going on with us. And for me to come from a love of beer and beer production, even on the small scale, was something that was really important to translate into what we were doing here process-wise. I went back to my home brewing and looked at what beers were really flavorful and rich.
The American Single Malt was just making a chocolatey, roasty beer and distilling it so those flavors carry over into the spirit.
An American Single Malt whiskey is an interesting thing. It's just not known throughout our country. We're known for bourbon or rye, and that's what everyone was doing. Ultimately, we wanted to come out of the gates with something that really caught people off guard, that made them think, that made the experience a more unique one. And we're trying to kind of put our own stamp on our single malt whiskey. Outside of just the world we live in every day, distilling's been around forever. Like, at the very least, a few hundred years when it's been done really well. And there's been such a crazy tradition of what we're doing now. And we get to live in this and do this reemergence in a different direction. That, I remember when we made our very first batch off the still and how stoked I was just tasting the distillate and realizing, like, this couldn't be closer where I want it. It's such a unique whiskey. We thought it was 3 years.
Yeah, I was like, 2 years we'll have this down.
And talked to Karen from Montaigne, and she's like, guys, it's at least 7 years.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, like, Karen's crazy.
Yeah.
It's not going to take
How
that
do you get
long.
this fixed in 2 years?
Yeah, but that's just how it goes. Like, it's such slow brand growth, awareness, presence.